Good morning. So glad to be here today, and as we prepare to enter worship, I'm going to mention a couple of things that you may want to ponder as we enter into worship. For example, did you know that Ralph Waldo Emerson, our own beloved Saint Ralph, experienced mystical visions and out-of-body experiences? And did you know that many of our most notable Unitarian forebears, people like Thomas Starr King and Lydia Maria Child, regularly attended seances and consulted with trance mediums? And that's just the Unitarian side of our tradition. If we look at the Universalist side of our tradition, things really start to get weird. Did you know that in the mid-19th century, spiritualism took hold with Universalist churches? Around half of all Universalist churches in the 1850s, half of all Universalist churches in the 1850s hosted seances, and preachers would frequently deliver a sermon not from a prepared text, but by entering into a trance and relaying a communication from the spirit realm. And coming a bit closer to our time, did you know that the first Americans to go public with a UFO abduction experience were Betty and Barney Hill, active members and lay leaders in their local UU church? What do we do with all of this? What if, I wonder, what if we regarded it with curiosity and wonder? What if we even regarded paranormal experience as one of the sources of our tradition? Because it is. Things may get a little spooky this morning, so come, let us worship together. Ready for this? All right. So actually, I began with a little joke here. So, and this is actually, so the last time that I was in Wilmington, I jumped out of an airplane. I went skydiving down at Coastal Carolina. And the second to last time I was here in Wilmington, I participated in a psilocybin magic mushroom ceremony facilitated by a shaman. So I'm nearly as excited to be here with you this morning. So here's what I want to do this morning. I'm going to talk just a little bit about history, especially the history of the paranormal and the mystical within Unitarianism and Universalism. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think this might mean. And finally, I'm going to ask us to think what this might mean for Unitarian Universalist religious communities today. So first, the history, or at least a little bit of it. I want to begin with Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the greatest influencers of Unitarianism. Emerson's spirituality was greatly shaped by his brilliant aunt, Mary Moody Emerson. Mary, in turn, was greatly influenced by Emanuel Swedenborg. Swedenborg was an 18th century Swedish philosopher, scientist, and mystic, and psychic. And in particular, Swedenborg claimed to be able to leave his body and travel to heaven and to hell, where he had conversations with angels, demons, and other spiritual beings, and then he would come back and write those experiences down. In Emerson's own writings, he seems to also describe his own mystical visions and out-of-body experiences. Here from his essay, Nature. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing, I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. I am the lover of uncontained and immortal beauty. So during the 19th century, just as Emersonian transcendentalism was sweeping through Unitarianism and Universalism, spiritualism was also sweeping through the United States. And being a fan of UU history like I am, I kept reading these biographies of all of these different influential Unitarian and Universalist figures from this era. And I would read their biographies, and there would be these descriptions of them attending seances and consulting with trance mediums. And I would wonder, why was I never told about this part of our history? And the more and more I dug into this, the more and more common it became. As one historian told me, what would be truly extraordinary would be to find a Unitarian from this period who didn't dabble in spiritualism. Did we know this was part of our history a little bit? And yet, it's like this widespread part of our history, and yet we keep it on the down low. We pretend that it's not there. And when we tell the story of when we tell the history of the Unitarians and the Universalists of that era, we focus on how they were visionary social reformers, working to end slavery, working for women's rights, dreaming up utopian communities, and so on. We talk about the important Unitarians and Universalists of that era as creators of a new American literature. We talk about them as spiritual revolutionaries, but we actually don't pay attention to their own spiritual experiences and how what they meant. And what I want to argue this morning, or what I want to pose to you, is this idea that all this mystical and spiritual stuff that they were getting involved in is not some trivial footnote. I want to argue holistically that these spiritual visions and uncanny experiences actually supercharged our religious forebears. And I want to argue that their amazing social and political and artistic endeavors actually flowed out of their direct experience of wild and untamed spiritual energies. So not only is it not a dirty secret, it's, I'm convinced, the very center of kind of what they were about, or at least that's my interpretation of the history. So I was really interested in this, so I decided to take a sabbatical. It was 2 years ago, and during the sabbatical, I was going to research extreme religious experience, mysticism, the paranormal, everything that I could, and think about how it might sort of connect with Unitarian Universalism. That included a trip to Wilmington, by the way. But I want to talk about a different experience, which was this. I went to an academic conference on the paranormal. This was in the spring of 2022, and the conference was held at Rice University, a really, really great school. Rice had just opened a new special collections library holding one of the largest archives of primary sources related to the paranormal. The Archives of the Impossible, they called it. The archives contains primary sources related to encounters with UFOs, remote viewing, near-death experiences, and psychic experiences. And so I got to this conference, and the conference was about a third academics, about a third UFO buffs, and about a third experiencers, people who had actually experienced paranormal experience. And as far as I could tell, I was the only minister. And it's really something to feel like the weird one at a UFO conference. Really? You know? But here's the thing that I was getting at. So there was this moment there where there was this experience among the academics of kind of coming out of the closet, although but it was a sort of the ability to kind of honestly claim their interests. And so I looked around who was there. So Rice University was there with They're archives of the impossible, and Duke University was there. I know that we don't mention Duke in North Carolina, but I'm from Chapel Hill, so if I say it in my church, then everyone sort of, like frown at Duke. But so, how many of us knew that Duke, for more than a generation, sponsored a research institute called the Rhine Center, which did parapsychology research? And that even after they split with the Rhine Institute, a group of Duke faculty formed their own paranormal working group, which came out of the English literature department as a response to all of these people studying literature and all of these authors who are talking about their firsthand paranormal experiences. And the paranormal working group is like, what do we do with this? So it's out of the English department. So Duke University has a paranormal working group on their faculty. University of Virginia, great school, right? And they have a part of their psychology department that's focused on studying the past lives of children. Children who have a connection, a memory of a past life. Cornell University, great school, whose psychology department studies precognition and ESP. University of North Carolina, Wilmington, great school. And I wonder how many of you know about a professor in the religion department named Diana Pasulka? Well, you should. I'm currently reading her new book, which is called Encounters, Experiences with Non-Human Intelligences, UFOs, Dreams, Angels, AI, and Other Dimensions. It's fun to come. I want to go see if I can meet her. Or if you want to get really weird, just go to a physics department and ask them to tell you about quantum entanglement, God particles, and spooky action at a distance, right? What if that actually scales up and we have spooky action at our level as well? So here's what I'm trying to say. I went to this academic conference and was struck by just how spooky and how super the university is. I look at our Unitarian and Universalist forebears and I'm struck by just how spooky and super our religious tradition is. And so I wonder about us. When I first became the minister in Chapel Hill in 2014, the Adult Religious Education Committee at our church invited me to give a lecture on a topic of my choosing, and I chose, in my third week there, to speak about mystical and paranormal experiences. I said, I'm going to throw some wild stuff out there, and I gave kind of the lecture version of some of this sermon. And my new congregation responded by asking me, when's our turn? Can we have a time to all get together and share our experiences? And I said, oh, no. And then they kept badgering me. And so a few months into my ministry in Chapel Hill, I gathered with more than a dozen parishioners in a classroom. We dimmed the lamps and lit candles, spooky. And my parishioners took turns telling their stories. One parishioner was driving at night and looked over and saw a man walking on the sidewalk, a man she recognized. She pulled over and rolled down her window, and the man on that sidewalk seemed to be her uncle, who impossibly lived 3 time zones away and had no business being on a sidewalk. Confused and a little bit uncertain, she kept driving, arrived home to receive a message that her uncle had died. Another church member with a small child was facing a difficult family situation where she was going to become a single parent. Her refrigerator at home had those letter magnets, like, the letter magnets that people with small children have. Her child then was too young to spell, but she a number of times found the letters on her refrigerator rearranged into messages that gave her strength and encouragement. Another parishioner talked about an experience in nature sitting beside a stream when all of a sudden she fell into a paralysis, like an electrical current surging through her body, and she experienced herself leaving her body, like Emerson, like Swedenborg, and then returning. Over the years, I've heard dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of stories of the impossible, the uncanny, and the spooky from my own members. Go figure that church could be a place where we can share our most amazing, meaningful, and impactful experiences. And somehow, cultivating this community in which people feel safe to share their most amazing and intense experiences has somehow resulted in a community alive with spirit, open, trusting, curious, willing to be amazed. Supercharged. I actually think, and this is not like, I'm being literal here, that I think in my own community, having people able to hear and share and listen and talk about things that happen to them, their own experiences in a deep way, is actually, it's like the core energy that drives the community. When I was in Texas at this paranormal conference, I met an experiencer named Elizabeth Crone. Elizabeth Crone's from Houston, Texas, and she had an experience many decades ago in which she was attending a meeting at her synagogue and was struck by lightning in the parking lot, had a near-death experience, and then upon recovering from this, there was a whole lot of interesting synchronicities in her life. I had read her book that I really liked, and I was so excited to meet her. And one of the things that she mentions in her book is how hard it was to be taken seriously as she was seeking meaning. She comes from the Jewish tradition, and this is not a rap on Judaism. This could be in any tradition, but she said that the people who were least helpful to her in kind of making sense about what had happened was her rabbi and other religious leaders she visited. And so I was actually, I wanted to meet her, and I introduced myself as a minister, and she sort of snarled at me. And then I said, but I'm a minister who is learning how to listen deeply to these experiences. And she said, every minister should be able to do that. Kind of, which it was sort of an interesting encounter, which go figure, like, we have all these texts and all of these stories and all of these experiences, and imagine if we actually took them seriously and each other seriously. So those are my really 2 points that I leave you with. First of all, the importance of becoming a religious community where people can share their most amazing, intense, vulnerable, and meaningful experiences is actually a way to supercharge. And second, my second part message to you is to become super. One of the speakers has a little talk called Everyone's a Little Psychic. So I want to ask you, I'll give you this test. Has the phone ever rang and you know who is calling before you answer? Well, that's okay, so you're psychic. Have you ever met someone and gotten a bad vibe? Or a really good vibe? Well, you know how to see and interpret auras. Have you ever felt deja vu? Then you are a time traveler as well. I say this that we think of these things not as like these out-of-body experiences that Emerson had or anything, but we actually live within a world that we do not fully understand and where there is so much to be curious about, so much to be interested in, so much to explore. And by being open to that, we cultivate the super within ourselves, not just the super to be able to, be psychic, which is, I'm not, fair, except in the ways that we all are. But superness to be able to be charged by this wonder and this amazingness, and to live in response to that. Those are all the stories not all the stories I brought, but all the stories that I have time to share. And of course, I leave it to you to make sense of it all. Thanks for having me this morning.